But Manny, you're here to talk about, among other things, the story out of the NFL that quickly became a national story. On Monday night, during what was, slated to be like the marquee matchup in the final weeks of the NFL between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Buffalo Bills. Early in the game, Bills safety Damar Hamlin, while making a routine tackle, suffered what appeared to be, or what was, cardiac arrest. And it was unclear in the first couple minutes what was happening. He after making that tackle, he stood up, took about a step back, collapsed. Trainers were called on the field. He received medical attention, and the game went to a commercial break, as it typically does during an injury that could take a minute or two. And people were unsure. It just looked like, oh, maybe he tore something, maybe he broke something. It happens. It's a rough game. As time went on, it became clear, multiple commercial breaks during the Monday Night Football broadcast. After coming back from the third one, you saw an ambulance on the field and players gathered around them. Then we started to see footage of people crying. And then it became clear this is so much more than just a standard football injury. After, several minutes and him eventually being taken off the field, still with no real clarity of what happened, it was, the call was made by Joe Buck, the announcer, that each team would have 5 minutes to warm up and the game would resume, which struck a lot of people as odd because it just appeared as though something very serious happened. The coaches then conferred with the refs. They went to the locker room. It became clear, okay, this isn't going to happen in 5 minutes. Players were visibly shaken up. As I said, it later turned out, and we found out later that he had a cardiac arrest. He had to be given CPR, an AED on the field. Like, he was shocked. And he was given CPR and treatment for several minutes. And he had to be resuscitated multiple times on the field. Over the past few days, we've seen just how serious it was. He was taken to the University of Cincinnati Hospital. He was in critical condition. He wasn't breathing on his own, but his vitals did stabilize, thankfully. There's still no real developments. We're recording this on Wednesday. There's still no, tangible material developments. But I'm curious, from your perspective, Manny, you're someone who, covers news, is a huge football fan. You understand, yes, football is a violent game, and you understand the criticisms around the sport. You and I talk about football constantly because we're both big Ohio State fans. And even looking at that, like the hit that Marvin Harrison Jr. took just a couple nights before, and you compare that with the incident in the Bills and Bengals game with Damar Hamlin, like, by comparison, the Harrison hit was much more brutal and much more dangerous. But what happened here in this game was a freak accident. It's obviously deeply unfortunate, but this is just a total, freak accident. He was hitting the right place. It seems like, if this is the case, it's commotio cordis, or I can't remember the exact name, but it's basically, people are speculating that he was basically, if you're hit on the right time in the chest with enough force, right in the right spot at the right time during your electrocardio cycle, it can stop your heart. And it's happened to other athletes before. It happens a lot in baseball. It happened to Jerry Lawler of then WWF, I think, but now WWE.
I was there.
You were there?
Yeah, that was in Montreal a couple years ago. Jerry Lawler's heart stopped when he was doing commentary after wrestling a match earlier that night.
Oh my God.
It was very dark, but please continue.
Well, we should get into that, and then also the heart incident too, because George Schmitz was at the heart incident, because that was in Missouri. But Manny, I'm curious what your takeaways were in that moment. Mm-hmm. What your thoughts were about the NFL trying to restart the game and now trying to say that they never had any intention of starting the game, and the fallout since. Conversations around it, people's criticisms of the NFL. Is it warranted? And where do we go from here? I mean, it's a lot to put on your plate all at once, but I'm just curious what your general takeaways are.
Yeah, no, it's all good. But we can talk through it. As you said, I'm a huge football fan, huge Ohio State fan. Rest in peace to them. But this hit that for example, you brought up the Marvin Harrison Jr. hit that happened. There are ways on an administrative level to filter out those kinds of hits, because those have a little more malice to them. They're a little more intentional. And the conversation around Damar Hamlin's hit is a little touch and go, because it was such a freak accident, like you mentioned. I mean, that was as routine a tackle as I've ever seen. And so there have been like sports personalities talking about how do we make football safer for the players around Damar Hamlin, but that is just a really tough. The physicality, like the physics of that, is really tough to filter out of the game. It was just such a normal hit. For me, the more important conversation should be I think should be centered around the relationship between the NFL and its players. Damar Hamlin is a couple years into the league. I think he makes somewhere around $800,000 a year, which sounds like a lot of money, but when you
low in NFL standards,
low in NFL standards, and when you consider the fact that after this injury, he might not ever play football again, and is now probably going to be tasked with like the most excessive medical bills and insurance bills that you can imagine. You start to have a conversation about what is the NFL doing to mitigate this situation, and the answer is not much. The current, or between the last collective bargaining agreement between the players and the NFL and the current agreement, disability payments went from $22,000 a month to $4,000 a month. And what I hope, I'll put it this way. Our job is, what we do for a living is like analyze politics. I love sports, but I'm not a sports analyst. But what I know is that, in politics, we often call out and try to better understand like corporate greed and how corporations prioritize profit over its workers. And while like the media does do a lot of reporting on that, it's not necessarily going to be on like your local news station, right? You're not going to hear about collective bargaining agreements before like the meteorologist comes on. But with the NFL, everybody consumes the NFL. Everybody watches football. And if you don't watch football, you're probably going to watch the Super Bowl. And I just hope that in terms of consumption, because of how public the NFL is, people start to see the problematic relationship between the NFL and its players, and can hopefully resonate with it and take away something and realize that level of greed is prevalent in most, if not all, industries in the United States. And so reasonable people will say this might not be the time to talk about that aspect of this. We're still waiting to hear what's going to happen with Damar Hamlin, but I would argue this is probably the best time to talk about it, and hopefully there's something we can come away with this.
One interesting wrinkle to the story that I found interesting anyway was that the decision to postpone the game didn't come from the NFL. It came from the Players Association. It came from the union. Basically, they stepped in and said, no, we're not putting the players back on the field after this has happened. It's just not happening, which is I think it's a pretty cool example of this kind of real time worker solidarity moment, right? Where they came together to make this big call when the NFL was obviously pushing them back, wanted them to get back on the field. There's a lot of money at stake. Like Jordan was saying, it's a big, as Skip Bayless pointed out as well, it's a big game, is like with all kinds of implications, all kinds of ad money, all kinds of stuff on the line. And I thought it was really cool that the Players Association just stepped in and said, like, no, we're not doing this. The game's over.
Yeah, I also love the NFL thinking that we're going to believe that, they came out and said, we never said anything about 5 minutes. They denied the allegation. But, we're not talking about like a leak. We're talking about Joe Buck, who's just like a legendary NFL announcer. he is not going to say anything on air unless it's confirmed already, unless it's coming straight from a reliable source. And the idea that the NFL was like, hey, this is a terrible accident, but the show must go on, is the least surprising thing I've ever heard in my life. We are, weeks, maybe a couple months removed from Miami Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa being concussed and then being put back into the game 4 days later and then being injured again. I thought it was so laughable that the NFL wanted us to believe that they didn't actually say that.
Yeah, the Skip Bayless tweet. I mean, I think it's a lot of people were wondering what was going to happen, because this was such a unique circumstance, which I'll get into, the reactions overall, and I thought some of them were misguided. But because this was such a unique circumstance, that suspending the game was even on the table, I think led to some people wondering, okay, well, what happens? Because this does have playoff implications. There's not much time left to make that game up. But the conclusion, I think, and I can't remember who at Defector wrote it, so my apologies, but a lot of great stuff has been published on Defector, so definitely go check out them. But I can't remember who specifically wrote it. They just said, who cares? Don't have the game. The Bills, it doesn't count. Bills get home field advantage. Bengals, whatever. They'll be fine.
Yeah.
Like, they're still in really good shape. It's not like one team gets knocked out. So it doesn't have like that big of implications. Just Bills will get home field advantage and a bye.
Yeah.
Okay, is that really that big of a deal? It's the least they could get in this scenario. They just watched one of their teammates almost die. It's
right.
I think it's like the playoff equivalent of just, someone gets hurt in a soccer game and they kick the ball out to stop the game. The other team will just throw them the ball back, give them the ball back. It's like good sportsmanship. Shouldn't we celebrate that? And Skip Bayless is just such a hated person. I think he was just pointing that out at the wrong time. And because of and this is something that Tom Williams pointed out last night when he and I were talking about it. He's like, this is just 20 years of hatred building up to this point. Like Shannon, I did like Shannon Sharp's comments on Undisputed today, because he took yesterday off. I would imagine he was fuming. That hits home for him.
Yeah.
Sterling Sharp was like paralyzed on the field. Like, he's definitely like extremely mindful about players' well-being. And Shannon had a long storied career with the Broncos. So I hate him, but I also do think, not to defend him, but I do think it was just people hate him so much, and that's why they
when your whole job is to be a hater, then that's going to be the response that you get.
Yeah,
and that's the thing about people like Skip Bayless and a lot of people in sports media is often I find them detestable people, but I also do find them very entertaining. I see it as like a wrestling thing, right? It's like Skip is a heel. Skip Bayless is a heel. Yes. That's right. And just like once that's your persona, then you can't really like slip out of that in those moments.
It was really interesting the day after that tweet, Skip Bayless, who's a known LeBron James hater, went on about how great LeBron James was after his tweet. And so he was like essentially trying to like get back on everyone's good side. Which is so funny how like the sports commentary works. It's so insane.
Yeah.
But yeah, to your point, like the Bills and the Bengals are both good teams. We're not talking about a team that is trying to become a wild card. So who cares? Cancel the game. They both have one less game on their schedule. The world is not going to explode. Let's just, move on. And worse, I mean, I doubt that they're just going to cancel it. I do think they're going to replay it at some point. So it's like at that point, then yeah, great. Just change the day of the game. I couldn't believe how many people were like worried about like the outcome of the season if we just moved the game 2 weeks.
Yeah. Like, it's one thing to be curious, because it's just like, oh, what does happen now? This is a huge moment. You're within that curiosity is a recognition of just how serious and severe this injury and this moment was for everyone involved. And then you're like, where do they go from here? Within that conversation is, mental exploration of the future of the season for them.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it begins and ends. It's not like the NFL. For the NFL, it was 5 minutes of warm up, get back out there. For everybody else, it was like, wonder what's going to happen now. Yeah. I hope he's okay. and like his well-being should be the center
Right.
of everyone's thoughts.
Yeah.
And for the most part it has, but it really just shows the callousness of the NFL. And as other sports writers have pointed out, you saw this in every other big incident. It's usually demonstrated in silence. Silence after Ray Rice, silence after learning about the effects of CTE. They just don't care. Silence on the protests over racial injustice in this country and police brutality.
Mm-hmm.
I think Dave Zirin at The Nation pointed out that, and it brought back to memory for me, they didn't really do anything until the George Floyd protests. Then they started painting like "end racism" on like the the outside of the end zones, and now they have like "love wins" or whatever they have on like their helmets now, like a little just like hollow.
Yeah.
And famously, racism immediately ended after that time, though. So you got to hand it to them.
They did it.
They did it.
Yeah,
It was effective. Yeah. Yeah. It's just, I view the NFL as just like the bare minimum league. They're just going to do the bare minimum, especially with, we've seen, for example, Deshaun Watson. It's like, all right, we're going to give him a suspension, but the NFL views the situation as, okay, did he do all that stuff? Probably, but he's great at football. We're going to put him back in the game because he's one cog in a wheel that churns billions of dollars for us. And so, as long as profit is prioritized over like player safety and ethics and morals, like, as a huge lover of the game of football, I can't really see a path where it becomes like an ethical sport. And that's really depressing, because there are so many moments in football that are just, I believe, like earnestly believe are beautiful. Like, I think the game is incredible. Like, I think, I can't, watching like Patrick Mahomes escape 3 attempted sacks and throw a no-look pass 60 yards down the field to a player who has to run at like literal Olympic speeds to catch them. It's like, that's incredible, and I love watching it, but it's such a shame that the league organizing this play is so morally bankrupt. And I don't really see much of a path for reforms there. But hopefully something happens. I don't know.
yeah. I mean, it's never going to be a fully ethical scenario or league. It's just not. One step in the right direction would be guaranteed contracts for everybody who plays, and immediately qualifying for a pension and other benefits post-career. Because right now you have to play 3 years. If Damar Hamlin never plays again, he doesn't qualify for a pension as it stands now. And these teams are owned by billionaires who get a ton of public money to fund these stadiums. Let's talk about it. The Bills asked for the entire cost of their new stadium to be paid by taxpayers just like a year or two ago. This guy is worth multiple billions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Is in great financial shape, also owns the Buffalo Sabres. They want a new stadium, and they want 100% of the bill to be footed by taxpayers. In what world does that make sense? And when people are exploiting the citizens and the fans of the cities in which their teams play, they should also have the money. They should also be required to put up the money to cover the benefits for these players. And that includes guaranteed contracts. So if you have some freak accident in your first or second season that leaves you with a lifetime of pain, potentially a physical disability, you're covered, because you're putting your neck out there for these fucking typically racist, Trump supporting or GOP supporting billionaires who own these teams, who just ultimately, through other aspects of their life, make the world a worse place. They're exploiting your labor and your physical well-being for profit. No, they can foot the fucking bill for your benefits.
Well, I think it's the kind of thing too that people get confused by, without thinking about it too much. Like, well, these guys are rich. Like you said, he makes $800,000 a year. Like, what does he need benefits for? But like, people don't understand that, like, if you're a pro athlete and you're the absolute best of the best, and everything breaks right, you don't have injuries, and everything goes right in your career, well, you're playing maybe 10 years, 10, 12 years, right? And then you like, that's your whole income for your main, for your entire life. So People get a little bit confused about that just because these guys make high salaries that they shouldn't have to pay for benefits or things like that. When it's like,
Right. And we're talking about mostly like the stars of the NFL. Like these guys
Yeah.
are going to be fine. But like, I mean, Damar Hamlin, I've heard of him, but I'm like, sure, most people haven't until this accident. And, some of these bit players, some of these cornerbacks, safeties, they don't make anywhere near the amount that players on the offense do. And so that's just something to keep in consideration too. The NFL knows that these players are like risking their lives. They know that they would put their lives on the line to win, and they're taking advantage of that. But like, if you know that a player is risking his life, then you have to, in a just world, you would match that energy with like the benefits and the payments, and that's just not the situation that we're in right now, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, and just speaking to the whole like owner stadium thing we've talked about before, but it's like the ultimate example of like publicly subsidized, privately profitable, right? That's how we do it. That's how we do it in this
Yep.
amazingly efficient economic system that we love to brag to everyone about.
Yeah, you as the taxpayer have to foot the bill for the stadium and then get charged like an arm and a leg just to get into the stadium to watch a game,
Yeah.
and then are price gouged at the concession stand. It's just such a fucking scam.
And then some guy gets the profit, and like when they win the Super Bowl, or if they do, he's the first person they go, "Here you go, sir." It's like, what? You didn't do
I
anything.
hate that.
You didn't do
I
anything.
fucking hate that.
You're literally just some guy. You're barely even involved.
That is the worst.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all here for Arthur Blank to hold up the
Yeah.
hold up the just
It's the
trophy.
worst part of every trophy ceremony. It's like, oh yeah, the guy who I look up to is making a speech. It's great. Then they pass it off to this old crusty dude you've never seen in your fucking life, and he's sitting up there for 30 minutes. And so who is this guy? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Oh God, the amount of times I saw Robert fucking Kraft up there, like getting his greasy little like happy ending palms all over the Lombardi Trophy after doing nothing. Part of the conversation around this also, I saw a lot of people quickly taking to Twitter to be like, the NFL sucks. They don't care about their players. It's like, yes, they do. Yes, they do not care. I agree. The NFL does suck. They do not care about the players. But it felt like this wasn't the avenue to attack that. For this, I thought the target should be that these contracts should all be guaranteed, because if Damar Hamlin doesn't play again, like maybe something will change because it is such a unique circumstance. But anyone else without this, like without the profile, this kind of a high profile on the injury, it's like, you're out. Sorry, we're only paying you to play. These are at-will contracts. Unlike people like Deshaun Watson, who does have a guaranteed contract for years. He has like, I think, close to $200 million guaranteed. So even if he just like doesn't play the remainder of that contract, he gets paid. But people like Hamlin, up and comers, young people, and the league churns through so many people. It's not necessarily, this story is not necessarily about the barbarism inherent in football.
Right.
It's about a freak accident potentially ending this guy's career with no guarantee of a safety net. And that is horrifying. And that is a problem throughout our economy and our workforce and our system. Mm-hmm. And there is just no adequate safety net in general in this country, but especially in the NFL, without the guarantee of contracts. And I just saw a ton of people who already hate football see this as a moment to be like, oh yeah, I hate this. It's so violent. This wasn't even that violent of a play.
Yeah.
It was a routine tackle. And then he got up. It was just that this freak accident stopped his heart. Mm-hmm. He was like physically, his heart aside, he was fine. He didn't, break an arm or pull a muscle or anything. He was fine after that tackle. And I thought people totally missed the boat because they already hated the NFL, and that led to a lot of misguided criticisms when this should be about, in any event, but especially in a freak accident, you should have a safety net for you. Like you pointed out, they cut the disability benefits. They cut from $22,000 to $4,000 a month if you even qualify, and all players should be guaranteed a pension. If you're even in the league, you should be guaranteed a pension. It is dangerous, so you should guarantee that for everybody, not just people who are lucky enough to make it 3 years and then they vest.
Right, like the level of barbarism, as you put it, wasn't necessarily, that wasn't really a concern for this hit. But the idea that at any point in a football game you can be taken out for the rest of your life, lends credence to the fact that these benefits should just be astronomically better for the players. I mean, even I'd go so far as to say that, like, obviously what happened to Tua was, that those are nasty hits, and that does have a little bit of a place in this barbarism conversation. But more concerning to me was the callousness shown by either the Dolphins or the league or whoever was making those decisions to put him back in a game 4 days later. We know the game is violent. We'd love for it to be less violent. We don't know how to get to that point, but more pressing than that, in my opinion, is how the league reacts to these incidents, and it's just abysmal.
And this happens in other sports too. This is an extremely common thing in Little League Baseball. It is the number one cause of death in Little League Baseball, and has a much higher rate in sports like baseball and also lacrosse, where you're whipping a ball around very fast.
Wait, does Little League Baseball have like multiple deaths in it? This was the first I'm hearing
from
of
this. Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's dangerous. But it also happened in wrestling. It happened to Jerry Lawler. He got hit it was like getting elbowed in the chest repeatedly during a match, and then he went to finish calling the event, and then late, like about 30 minutes later, collapsed, and he had not a heart attack, but he had cardiac arrest.
Yeah, it was in Montreal.
And Rob, you were saying you were there.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that?
Yeah, it was crazy. It was I was there at Monday Night Raw watching, and it was just weird because I was in the 300s or something. I was kind of far away. It was kind of hard to see what was going on. But just because there was a Jerry Lawler match earlier, he was in a tag team match. I can't remember who he was teaming with, but against Dolph Ziggler and CM Punk, and he took a bunch of elbows to the chest, and then went back to call the event like you were saying, and then just like sometime 30 minutes later, it was really hard to see what was going on, but this really dark vibe just kind of like settled on the arena, and it was clear that something weird and bad was going on. And there was a big you saw like people gathering around the announce table or whatever, and it was pretty hard to see what was going on. But then it became, I think people were checking their phones and everything, and it was very strange. Yeah. It was a very strange thing to be a part of. I went because it was without commentary. It was really hard to tell, because if you actually watched the event, you could hear like Lawler start to snore on the event, and then all of a sudden, there's just silence, and then you have Michael Cole talking about what's going on, and then the rest of the event just happened in total silence. But it was very strange to be a part of.
So they didn't stop the event, right?
Oh, no.
They didn't stop.
I mean, WWE famously, when one of the wrestlers died in the ring, they continued with the event. They don't stop. They don't, no matter what's going to go on. Like, that's the most extreme thing that could possibly happen.
That's crazy. They know he died, or they just like took him out and.
Owen Hart fell from a zip line. He was zip lining down to the ring, fell, however many stories into the ring, had to be carted out. And yeah, they continued the event afterwards. And yeah, I believe they announced that he died at the event, which still continued.
In the event?
Yeah, which still continued. Wow. Yeah. You see WWE in that case being the, like, in terms of like, capitalism in general, or like sports in general, just being the absolute apex of all the worst instincts and the worst phenomenons. The way that they treat their workers, the way that they treat their contracted workers as independent contractors, and they don't pay them healthcare. They don't pay them hotel and car rental and all the things. Like, these guys are on the road 300 days a year, and their company, they're not allowed to compete for other companies, but they're not official employees, and don't get official benefits or overtime or like a salary like that. They're treated as independent contractors. All the worst instincts of American business basically is exemplified in pro wrestling, WWE.
Yeah, it is by far the
sports
worst.
world kind of just gets away with it with little to no scrutiny, because of the idea that the players and the athletes are just, living lavish lives and making millions of dollars a year, and that's true in a lot of cases. But a worker's right is a worker's right, and
Yeah.
like it kind of doesn't matter what scale we're talking about, especially if someone like Damar Hamlin, who's playing for millions of dollars, can't access any of that money if something bad happens to him.
Yeah, yeah. The horror stories that you've heard time and time again from people post wrestling careers are just unbelievable and unlike so many other sports. I mean, football is probably the closest. There's a lot of really traumatic stuff happens to football players post career, especially now that we see that CT is the cause of a lot of it. But even before that, guys with just like really debilitating pain for the rest of their life. Wrestling just seems like unbelievably bad. Like how they treat their pain, like self-medicating with like alcohol and pain pills, just even while they're in the sport. It's really, really depressing.
I do think there have been some improvements, because there was that run in like the 2000s when it just seems there was just every single month another wrestler was dropping dead at 45 or 50 or like incredibly young. So I do think there has been some progress in terms of like tamping down that kind of lifestyle, and also providing a little bit more care to the actual people that are putting their health and their bodies on the line to like entertain people and make billions of dollars for the company, that's always the thing when it comes, whether it's wrestling or whether it's NFL or any other sport. When people complain about these athletes making exorbitant salaries, it's like they maybe maybe LeBron James makes hundreds of millions of dollars, but he's making hundreds of billions of dollars for the stadium, for the owners of the team, for the owners of the NBA, for the advertising companies, the corporations, the ABC, NBC, ESPN. Like, they're creating billions. So yeah, they're entitled to a significant cut of that. They're the ones doing the actual work, not the owners of the teams.